Hello and welcome back to my little Lion King toy box for part 2 of my 6-part mini-series of camera tutorials. I'm Professor Toybox, and this of course is Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey. Last time I introduced you to the 4 different kinds of cameras that are available in the toy box, and we looked at some of the basics of using a target camera. Today we're going to look at another kind of camera, the angled camera. And this camera has a lot of the same properties and logic connections as the target camera, but it works a little differently. So first thing we'll do is go ahead and place one down, and I'll put this about the same position that I put the other camera last time, but I'll flip this around and point at that button. And just like the, oops, I didn't mean to exit out of that, I wanted to go into spark mode. Just like the target camera, you can't really do anything with that until you activate it. And so I'll come over to my button over here, and we'll do a new logic connection when pressed. We'll come over to the target camera and connect, or the angled camera rather, and you'll notice that it has the same 2 behaviors as the target camera. You can activate it, which turns it on. You can deactivate it, which turns it off. So I'll go ahead and activate it, and then we'll come over here and push the button and see what happens. So as you can see, this camera gives you a view similar to what you see in the Brave Forest Siege and the Escape the Kiln games in 2.0, as well as the Toy Box Takeover game in 3.0. And it's kind of fun just climbing this thing in this mode. You'll notice that the view is up in the air above the player, and so it doesn't really matter that I placed the camera on the ground. And I'll exit out of that view, and we'll come back into the editor. You'll remember that I placed this on the ground, and yet when I pushed the button, the camera was up in the air, so it doesn't really matter that the camera was on the ground. Another thing that I want to point out is that with this camera, if I use the button to go into Mickey's targeting mode in order to be able to shoot, this mode does not work with that camera. And so when this camera is on, you can't use that mode. And I'm trying to go into that mode right now, and it won't let me. And so that's one of the downsides of this. Now you'll notice the angle of the camera when I activated it. And if we come back out of this mode, and I go back into spark mode, I'm going to go ahead and rotate this camera, and I'm going to turn it 90 degrees that way. So the camera is now facing over there. And if I come over here and push the button, you'll notice the angle now is different. And so it's changed. And it's 45 degrees off the direction that it's facing. So the camera's facing that way, but my view is facing this way. So it's 45 degrees clockwise from where you place the camera. Previously, it had been pointing at the button, and when we activated the camera, it was looking that way. So it's always 45 degrees clockwise from where that camera is facing. So the orientation of the camera matters because that determines the angle of the view. I'll go ahead and exit out of that. And let's go ahead and put this back the way it was. And we'll go ahead and look at some of the properties for this. And you'll notice as we open up the properties, it has many of the same properties that the target camera had. And a lot of them work the same way. But there are some differences, so we'll go through the list. First of all, again, let's look at this one first. We have the same defined duration and display duration that the other camera had. And if we turn this on, then it's going to use however many seconds we specify here. It'll stay on for that many seconds and then automatically turn itself off. So I'll go ahead and leave this off for right now. You'll notice there's no camera target property. And so this camera will only look at players. You can't connect it to a locator. You cannot connect it to an actor. It'll only ever look at players. There are camera types but there's only two for this one. You have follow, which is the default, and you have stationary. And so if we change that to stationary, and we come out and demo that, that works the same as the target camera did, which means it's going to stay in its initial position and it doesn't move or follow Mickey. So I can run off screen and back on screen, and the camera just doesn't move, it stays fixed. The option that's missing that the target camera had was focus, and that option basically pivoted around the camera view, and of course for the angled view that doesn't make any sense. So that's why that option is not there. So let's go ahead and put the camera type back to follow. The start and end transitions are the same, and you can do a cut and a fade, and unfortunately swing appears to be broken on the angled camera just like it was on the target camera for the latest patch on the Wii U anyway, so I can't demo that with this camera either. So I'll have to save that for another day, but I'll leave that set as cut. There's a new property called rotation and zoom control. So by default this is off, and what that means is that the angle of the camera is fixed and cannot be changed. But if I turn this on and we come back out and we come over here and press the button, so now it's going to follow me around, but I can use the right stick on the Wii U to rotate the camera. And so this allows me to look around. Unfortunately, it's kind of a slow rotation, and it doesn't seem to be any way to adjust that I can see. Another thing you can do is zoom. And on my Wii U anyway, if I press the right control stick, it'll zoom in. So I can get in a little bit closer to Mickey. And I can press that again to zoom back out. That's the same behavior that Toy Box Takeover has, so you can get that in your toy boxes with this camera as well. So that's a nice feature. Now let's go back in to the properties, because there's a few ramifications that feature has in some of the other properties. So if we come down to the vertical and horizontal offsets, these work similar to the target camera, but that rotation and zoom control property adds an interesting little twist to the behavior. So I'll set the vertical offset to be 5. And we'll come over here and press the button and see what happens with the angled camera. So you'll notice Mickey's not in the center of the screen. The camera is up higher, such that he is down towards the bottom part of the screen, and of course it follows and leaves him there. But as I rotate the camera, it keeps him in that spot, and so I'm actually still rotating around Mickey. So he's always going to stay in that same relative spot on the screen. The horizontal offset, though, doesn't work that way. It does something quite different. So let's come back down here and put that back to 0. And I'm going to put the horizontal offset up to 5. And now when we push the button, you'll notice Mickey is off to the left of the center of the screen. And it's going to stay in that relative position while I move around. However, if I rotate the camera, it's actually rotating around the center point of the view. And so now Mickey's off to the right side of the view, and he's off to the top edge of the view, and he's off to the bottom edge of the view. So that horizontal offset is a little bit different. The offset is really off of the center of the view, and just depends on where the camera is facing as to where Mickey's going to be on the screen. And so that's a little bit different than the target camera worked, or even the vertical offset works for this camera. So let's go ahead and put that back to 0. Now, the other option that's a little bit different, now this one, we looked at this before last time, so I'm not going to cover this too much, but you'll notice it's using the camera position to set the zoom distance. And I kind of changed my thought there in midstream, but I saw this one before I get to player viewport, and I wanted to just cover that. So again, if you turn this off, then it's going to use the zoom distance that you have set here. And so now if we come over and press this, and this one's really important with this camera, because now when we press this, you'll notice the camera is a lot closer to Mickey. And so I know that's one of the gripes people had about Toy Box Takeover, was that the camera was so far zoomed out you couldn't see the characters very well. Well, you can fix that with this camera by placing it a little bit closer to the player when they activate it, or by using the zoom distance property. And again, if I zoom in this camera, now we get in really close. And so that's kind of nice. I'll go ahead and zoom back out, and we'll exit out of that view. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out, because that's one of the flaws that you might think this camera has that you can actually overcome, and why the Toy Box Takeover game used such a far out zoom distance, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, and I'm just going to go ahead and activate that camera again just to make sure the zoom distance is set to that again. Okay, the other option is the player viewport, and that works very similar to the target camera, but there are some differences. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a second player, and I just put Rapunzel down on the base, and we'll bring her in.
I'm back.
And there's Rapunzel. So now we have two players. So let's go back into the angled camera properties. And for the player viewport, again, it's working on the triggering player, and that would work the same as you would expect it to, the same as the target camera did. And if I select that, all players works the same as it did. The one that's interesting here is the shared viewport. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, because this works a little bit differently with the angled camera. And so we'll go ahead and exit out of this. And we'll come over here and push the button. So now we're in a shared view. And so far, this is pretty much the same as what we saw with the target camera. So as we move further apart, the angled camera is working to keep both players in view. Now, so far that's the same. The difference here, though, is that only player 1 can rotate the camera if that property is on. I'm on player 2's control stick right now, and it's not letting me do that. And the other thing that you'll note, or that I'll point out, is that the zoom behavior doesn't work either. So I'm pressing the right control stick to zoom in, and that doesn't work, because this zoom behavior, keeping both players in view, is taking precedence. So only player 1 can rotate the camera. Doesn't matter which player activates the camera. I could have had Rapunzel activate that, but Mickey would still be the only one that can control this camera in the shared viewport option. So let me go ahead and exit out of that. And there's something else I want to show you with the shared viewport. I forgot to show you this last week with the target camera. But when you change that to be the shared viewport, there's another option that appears down here at the bottom called Shared Viewport Options. And so you can control how much space there is between the players and the edge of the screen. So you can keep them a little more into the middle of the screen if you want. You can also change the maximum that the thing will zoom out. And the minimum is already set to 10, but you can change that if you want as well. So at the maximum of 50, let me just go ahead and demo this, because I pointed out last week, and we saw it with this one, that when we're in the shared viewport and we start moving apart, the camera zooms out to keep both players in view. But there's a limit as to how far that will go. And I just reached it. So now both players are actually off screen. It's trying to stay somewhat centered to both players, but it's not able to do that because that maximum distance is set to 50. But we can come in here and change that. So we go under the properties, we go all the way to the bottom to the shared viewport options, and we can take this maximum zoom all the way up to 100. It'd be nice if we could type it in, but the slider is what we have to work with. And so now if we come over here and push the button, now I can go a lot further away and keep both players in view. And I can move Mickey all the way over there, and I can move Rapunzel pretty far out before one of the players goes off screen. And so we can go all the way out that far and still have both players in the view. You can hardly see them though, but they're there. So that's a nice little feature. So you can kind of zoom all the way out if you want to do that. And do some cartwheels. Woohoo! And then we'll go ahead and exit that view. The last thing we'll cover are the logic connections for the angled camera. So if we come under here and look at the new logic connections, you have the same 4 trigger signals that the target camera had, and they all work the same. You can broadcast a signal here when the camera is activated, when it's deactivated, when a player exits the view or enters the view. So those are the same 4 trigger signals. So I just wanted to point that out. And again, you probably noticed last week, and this one has it too, the new path connection, and we're actually going to look at that in a few weeks. So I'm not going to cover that today. We'll cover that under some of the advanced camera techniques. So that's it for the angled camera. Next time we'll look at the bird's eye camera. Be sure to subscribe to my channel or follow me on my blog so you don't miss the next episode. And if you enjoyed my video or found it to be helpful, please give it a like and leave me a comment to let me know. Thank you for watching and have a great day.